All right, let's dive into one of the most ambitious economic stories of the 20th century, India's 5-year plans. I mean, this is literally the story of how a brand new nation, right out of the gate, tried to design its own future, one 5-year chunk at a time.
So, just for a second, put yourself in their shoes. It's the late 1940s, you've just gotten your independence, your country is massive, it's incredibly diverse, and frankly, it's dealing with crushing poverty. The question staring you right in the face is, how on earth do you build a modern economy from scratch? That was the monumental challenge for India's first leaders.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the blueprint itself. Then, we'll jump into the early nation-building years, see how a crisis changed everything, cover the great economic opening, and finally, wrap up with the whole legacy of this thing. So, where did this whole idea of a master plan even come from? Well, India's leaders needed a model, right? They looked around the world, and they didn't have to invent the wheel. The concept of central planning, well, they borrowed it. So what exactly is a 5-year plan? Well, think of it like a super detailed top-down economic roadmap drawn up by the government. The idea was actually pioneered by Joseph Stalin back in the Soviet Union. And for young India, with not a lot of private money floating around, this seemed like a really smart way to channel its limited resources toward big, important national goals. And to put this whole thing into motion, they set up something called the Planning Commission in 1950. And get this, the chairman was none other than the Prime Minister himself, Jawaharlal Nehru. That's how important this was. This new group was given the massive job of charting India's entire economic future. The era of planning was on. Okay, blueprints ready? Now the hard part starts.
And for the first 15 years or so, everything boiled down to one huge fundamental debate: farms or factories? Do you focus on feeding your people right now, or do you build the heavy industry that will make you a modern power down the road?
And you can see that debate play out perfectly in the first two plans. The first plan, it went all in on agriculture. But then, just 5 years later, the second plan did a complete 180. It flipped the script and went full steam ahead on rapid industrialization. Because back then, that's what everyone saw as the sign of a truly modern, powerful country. And you know what? That first plan, the one focused on farming, it was a massive success. It didn't just meet its growth target, it blew past it. And its legacy, wow, we're still living with it today. We're talking about huge projects like the Bakranangal Dam and, get this, the creation of the first Indian Institutes of Technology, the famous IITs. Then came the second plan, and like we said, it was a total shift in gears. The focus was now squarely on heavy industry. This is the period when India, with a lot of help from places like the Soviet Union and Germany, built these gigantic steel plants that really became the backbone of its industry. It got pretty close to its growth target too. But, and this is a big but, this intense focus on factories, kind of at the expense of farms, was about to cause some major problems. And here's where those problems really hit home. The third plan, well, it was a disaster. Just look at this. The target was a super ambitious 5.6% growth. The reality, a measly 2.4%. It missed the target by more than half. So the big question is, what went so wrong? Well, it turns out the plan got hit by a perfect storm of crises. First, a war with China in 1962. Then, another war with Pakistan in 1965. Both of these just sucked away crucial resources. And as if that wasn't enough, a massive drought hit and absolutely crippled the farms. The whole dream of a smoothly growing economy had to be put on ice. Yeah, that failure of the third plan was a huge wake-up call. It forced a major rethink. The next era wasn't going to be just about hitting growth numbers. Nope, it was about crisis management and turning the focus towards social justice. Actually, things were so bad that the government had to hit the pause button on the whole 5-year model. They called it a plan holiday. For 3 years, they just did smaller, 1-year plans to try and get the economy back on its feet. This crisis really forced a new direction. When the 5-year plans came back, the mission was completely different. The new Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, came up with a powerful slogan for the fifth plan, Garibi Hatao, which means eradicate poverty. And that said it all. The new #1 goal was a direct assault on poverty. Man, this was such a wild and transformative time. The government nationalized 14 major banks to get a handle on the country's money. India conducted its first nuclear test, the Smiling Buddha. They set up rural banks, But it was also an incredibly turbulent time politically, all leading up to the declaration of a national emergency in 1975. All right, the next chapter we're getting into, this is it. This is arguably the single biggest turning point in India's modern economic story. Decades of the government running the show were about to be replaced by something completely different. So, flash forward to 1991, and India is on the verge of going broke. It was facing what's called a balance of payments crisis. The simplest way to think about it is that the country was running out of foreign money, like US dollars, to pay for crucial imports like oil. The old system had completely failed. Something drastic had to be done, and fast. And that drastic action was a brand new economic policy. You might have heard of it as the LPG reforms. L for liberalization, meaning less government red tape. P for privatization, letting private companies play a bigger role. And G for globalization, opening India's doors to the rest of the world's economy. And the impact? It was immediate, and it was stunning. The 8th plan, which was the very first one after these big reforms, saw the economy just explode, growing at a blistering 6.8%, way above its target. It was proof. The big gamble of opening up the economy was absolutely paying off. This incredible success really marked the beginning of the end for that old-school style of central planning. The writing was on the wall. The way India managed its economy was about to change forever. You know, if you look at the last few 5-year plans, you can see the language starting to change. They started talking about things like inclusive and sustainable growth. This was a nod to the new reality. It was clear that the old, top-down, government-knows-best model just wasn't going to cut it anymore. And then, in 2014, they made it official. The Planning Commission was dissolved. Gone. And in its place, in 2015, a new body called NITI Ayog was created. Now, this wasn't just slapping a new name on the old building. It was a total philosophical change. They went from a central planner that told everyone what to do to a think tank that advises and works with the central and state governments. So when you step back and look at the whole 70-year experiment, what's the takeaway? Well, for all their faults, the plans built the core of modern India. The dams, the steel plants, the tech institutes, they gave the country a direction when there was very little private money to do so. And they guided India through that incredibly tricky shift from a state-run system to a market-based one. Look, they weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but they were the essential and, yeah, sometimes painful first draft for building a nation. Which brings us right up to today and leaves us with a huge open question. The era of 5-year plans is over. It's history. But India is now facing a whole new set of 21st century challenges. So what comes next? What's the next big economic blueprint going to be? What's the grand idea that will shape the next 70 years?